Everybody is on the bandwagon to integrate AI, right? They are in the rush to integrate AI into their business processes. What are the common mistakes that you're seeing that these enterprises do when they're adopting, these newer technologies, for example, AI and automation?
The AI topic comes up in not every meeting, but let's say 90% of them, maybe even more. And I will tell you, as I talk to folks about AI, that the number of people whose strategy seems to be, step one, AI, step two, kind of nondescript. We don't really know what step two is. Step three, profit. Like that's where a lot of people are, right? There's this belief that AI is hot and we have to do something in AI, but they don't have necessarily a plan to get from this AI thing into some monetizable or something with some kind of commercial outcome. And I think the lack of a direction there creates real problems.
Welcome to Discover Dialogues podcast, powered by TechDogs. The world of business and technology is evolving at breakneck speed. AI breakthroughs, digital transformation, and game-changing innovations are reshaping industries every day. On this show, we dive into the trends, ideas, and strategies driving the future. We're sitting down with industry leaders, innovators, and disruptors to bring you fresh insights, bold perspectives, and real conversations that matter. So plug in, tune in, and let's discover what's next.
Today on the show, we're joined by Michael Bushong, Vice President of Data Centers at Nokia, a leader who's spent over 2 decades at the crossroads of technology, transformation, and leadership. From beginning his career as a mechanical engineer who accidentally found his way into technical writing to shaping the future of AI-driven infrastructure, Michael's story is all about curiosity, adaptability, and clarity in complexity. Let's dive in.
Welcome to another episode of TechDogs Discover Dialogues. Michael, it's a pleasure to have you on the show today.
Thanks, Nikhil. I'm happy to be here.
And Michael, before we get into the technicalities of data center and AI integrations into it and leadership advice, I would like to rewind a little and, walk our audience through your professional journey. Because, when I did the research about your profile and, your work experience is not always a straight line. You have moved along from writing to training and eventually leading data center at Nokia, right? And I believe each of these experiences might have brought you, a wide array of experiences and feathers in your kitty. So for our audience, Michael, can you walk us through your professional journey and how has it shaped you till now for being a VP at a data center?
Sure. So I actually did research for Boeing when I was in college. So I started not even in tech. I was a mechanical engineer with a focus on fluid dynamics and advanced heat transfer. Probably as far as you could get from data centers and networking. The one thing I learned in college was that I actually don't like mechanical engineering. It just was not the discipline for me. But unfortunately, I didn't figure that out until I got kind of to the end of the 4 years in university. And so when I was looking for a job, I just needed a thing to do coming out of school. And I ended up as a technical writer at a database company. Now, I didn't know anything about databases. I didn't even know technical writing was a job, by the way. But I had a campus job, and my boss there, her daughter was like a director at Sybase. And so I went to Sybase, and technical writing, I think was pretty big for me because it gave me two things, right? When you're writing documentation for other folks, you got to be really clear on what it is you mean. And if you're trying to write for clarity on the other side, it really tunes how you communicate. And then the second thing was that I realized then that I could start to learn almost anything. I was not a database person when I started. Again, I didn't know that was a thing, but I was able to get proficient enough, and that gave me confidence to navigate in areas that maybe I wasn't as experienced in. From there, I went to silicon chip design software. The industry is called EDA. It's like design automation. And there I started off as a writer, but moved into training because I believed fundamentally to write about things, you had to learn it. And then as I became a trainer, then that gave me kind of an entry into the networking space as a technical trainer. And I will tell you, when I joined Juniper Networks, which was my first networking job, my interview process was crazy. I was meeting with people who would be in the Hall of Fame of networking. And this one guy, RK Anand, RK he's this tall hardware like ASIC design engineer, and he comes in with like a list of questions. And his first question is like, okay, so tell me what you know about BGP. And I looked at him, I'm like, I don't know anything about BGP. So he writes a note down, and then he says, okay, tell me what you know about OSPF. And I look at him, I'm like, I don't know anything about OSPF. And he kind of furrows his brow, and then he writes a note down, and then he starts in with his third question. I said, RK, let me just stop you right there. If you're asking me anything about networking, I promise you, I don't know anything about networking. Now, remember, I'm interviewing for a job to be a technical trainer in networking. I need to teach people networking, and I don't know anything about it. And he looked at me, he was like the way like an ASIC developer can. And he's like, what do you know? And then I explained what I did know, and that started a conversation. The training gig, it's like you got to be unapologetic about what you know and what you don't know. And I learned to say, I don't know. I learned to go get answers. 4 weeks after I joined, I didn't know anything about networking. 4 weeks after my first date, I had to deliver my first class. Now that class, and I apologize if any of my students are listening to this, because that was not a great class. I didn't know like half the material. But you learn like that you're capable, answer questions honestly. If you don't know, say you don't know, and then go get the answer. And that was a big part of how I learned. And that gave me the confidence to then move into product, where I kind of moved into product management, moved into strategy. I've led transformation initiatives. I've led, I've been the general manager and led kind of, large growing businesses. I've, more than doubled a couple of different businesses in the space. And so now I'm kind of a fairly well-rounded I guess technology exec, but I've got experience, in writing, in operations, in training, in transformation, in product management, in strategy, in supply chain. Like I've done all these different things. And so I think what it gives me is really a well-rounded view of what has to happen to make a business successful. And that well-rounded view, I'll tell you more than anything else, it gives me, I think, a pretty unique sense of empathy, because I understand a lot about what people are going through. And that's really how you bring teams together.
Definitely. And I also believe that empathy is what will what will bring people together. And when I look at your journey, Michael, I believe that, the adaptability and curiosity that you had towards, the entire tech space, has probably evolved your leadership path till now. And let's now, dive into the, the core area of expertise that you're dealing into currently, right? And as you said earlier that, you have led various transformations. And I believe that transformations is not always about chasing the shiny objects that are out there. It's about balancing innovation with operational discipline, right? And what I truly believe is that, in all of this is people and processes and technology should all be aligned in terms of to keep up and deliver the business goals that are supposed to be achieved, right? So my next question to you would be, because you have spoken about, about innovation and reliability are the two sides of the same coin, right? So how do you balance boldest bets in emerging tech like AI and automation and with operational reliability in especially sectors like data centers?
Yeah, I think one of the challenges, like tech in general, and then obviously I'm in the networking space, but like networking in particular, when you try to move forward, you tend to focus on the shiny thing, as you've pointed out. I think it's important to know where you're going, right? If you don't know where you're going, any step is the right direction. But if you lose sight of the things that really matter, and you kind of compromise on those things, I think what you end up with is a fairly faulty foundation. Let me give you just easy examples. The networking space, and if you take cloud more broadly, has gone through crazy transformation over the last, let's say, 12, 13, 14 years. We've seen the introduction of cloud. We've seen technologies like software-defined networking. We've seen movements like Kubernetes. We've seen things like SD-WAN. We've seen multi-cloud. Now, obviously, we're in the middle of an AI rush.
Exactly.
Every time one of these new kind of technology areas emerges, what happens is that everyone goes and chases after it. And the thing you want to do is get out to market fast, because the belief is that the first movers are going to have unusual advantage. And when you do that, what you tend to do is focus on how do you build the new thing, and usually it's either adjacent to or built on top of your existing platforms. Now, if you do that and you kind of forget the importance of the underlying stability, what you end up with is is a really good new thing built on, again, a faulty foundation, and the whole thing, sort of falls over. Imagine so again, I'm in the networking space. So imagine you're building out a data center for AI, and GPUs are crazy expensive. I'm not sure if you know how much a GPU costs, but it's like $55,000 per. And people are putting together hundreds or thousands of these, in some cases tens of thousands of these. If your network goes down, it's not just like, hey, my device is down. You've now stranded all of that investment. And so things like quality, things like the role of human error when you look at how you operate and manage these things, those are just as important as the fancy new feature and integrating with whatever NVIDIA or AMD or whoever is building on the NIC side. You've got to think through kind of that foundational bit. And so the question, and I think for good product leaders, it's really hard, right? How do I look at time to market? And how do I balance that with making sure that I get it right and I keep it right? Now, the thing I think people get wrong is there's this belief in, and I would say like in lower echelons of strategy, there's a belief that first movers get unusual advantage. But in most markets, it's not the first movers that end up being the eventual winners. The first movers take on all the uncertainty of that market, and in fact, they'll reap some reward, especially around like M&A and when the larger players go and acquire them in. But it's actually fairly uncommon that the first movers become like the dominant players in the space. And so I think when product leaders and strategists look at this whole idea of do I move quickly or do I move deliberately, I think we probably overweight the quickly side. And as a result, I think there's lots of instances where people have effectively lost the plot on their foundational technology. And again, let me give you an easy example. I said I started in tech writing. I was at a company called Sybase. Now, no one knows who Sybase is anymore, because back then, though, they were like literally the top database company. There was a release that they did where essentially Oracle released a thing called row-level locking. Doesn't matter what that is. Just think of it as a new capability. And Sybase, which was the market leader, rushed their equivalent out to market, and it did not work. And as a result, Sybase, no one knows who they are. They eventually got acquired by SAP, and they're gone. And Oracle is now dominant. Mm-hmm. Like that's a good example where it was like there's a new thing that comes out. Being there, first was not the most important thing. The thing, you couldn't get it wrong. And what Sybase did was they got it wrong, and you saw an entire market, turn over. Like I think people need to be a little bit aware of some of those risks. And then I will tell you that like if you get that the baseline bits right, you will build alongside your customers, and your customers will stay loyal. Now, of course, that doesn't mean you can go slow. Like it doesn't mean take your time, get to market whenever you're casually ready. It is a balance. But if you look today, I think that most people probably get that balance, or they lean too heavily on let me be a first mover.
For sure. So Michael, you've spoken about, how, businesses rush behind becoming the first mover advantage, taking the first move, right? But, and we also spoke about the shiny objects or the shiny tech, right? Usually this shiny tech, people are like, for example, AI right now is the talk of the town, right? And everybody is on the bandwagon to integrate AI, right? They are in the rush to integrate AI into their business processes without even thinking long term or ensuring that they might have great proof of concepts of AI in their business use cases. But when it comes to real execution, that's when most of the businesses are struggling at the moment. So, as enterprises modernize in today's day, what are the common mistakes that you're seeing that these enterprises do when they're adopting, these newer technologies, for example, AI and automation?
Yeah, so I'm on the road a lot. Last week, I was on the road 49 weeks talking to customers. I've talked to customers, maybe 250 customers and partners in the last, let's say 15, 16 months. So like a lot. The AI topic comes up in not every meeting, but let's say 90% of them, maybe even more. And I will tell you, as I talk to folks about AI, that the number of people whose strategy seems to be, step one, AI, step two, kind of nondescript. We don't really know what step two is. Step three, profit. Like that's where a lot of people are, right? There's this belief that AI is hot and we have to do something in AI. but they don't have necessarily a plan to get from this AI thing into some monetizable or something with some kind of commercial outcome. And I think the lack of a direction there, it creates real problems. Let me give you just a couple of examples. So AI will certainly transform virtually every industry that we see. I think AI is real, and I think it's durable. But just because it's real and durable doesn't mean that it's a great strategy for everybody. Take radiology as an example. So like medical images, X-rays, MRIs. It is clear that AI will transform how we read medical images. Right? It's already happening. So like I have 14-year-old identical twin boys. I would not guide them to go to school and become radiologists. Like I feel like that job is going to be under a lot of pressure, right? But just because AI transforms radiology, does that mean everyone building like AI radiology apps are going to make money? Actually, no. Once you have enough applications that can do the same thing, what it does is it drains the profit pool. Somebody's going to make their app available for free or for really cheap. And so it's absolutely true that AI will transform the industry. And it's simultaneously true that nobody gets rich off of that. And so it's a good example where it's like, yeah, you can start with AI, but if you don't have a credible strategy, you don't know that your investments are going to be durable. Something like 42% of enterprise AI projects are failing today. Like, and when I say failing, that means like they're being shut down. So if those are the ones being shut down, you can imagine there's some other percentage that are just failing. So what's happening is people are tinkering with it, but they're not getting to an outcome that matters to the business. And in the absence of that strategy, how can you possibly think that the technology investment that's required to sustain this is going to be justified in any sense? Now, again, I don't want to be an AI naysayer. I actually believe AI is a durable technology. But when I talk to folks, I think people need to really be grounded in this idea that you got to have more than a notion of a technology. Like AI is not a strategy; it's a tool, and you got to know what that tool is developed in support of. And in the absence of that, I think people are going to make investments that they struggle with. Right? I don't think it's enough to have like a star GPT for every company and to think that that's going to be the end all be all. And then from there, once you develop that strategy, then you can ask really deep questions like, what data am I going to use, right? So if I'm going to tune a model, do I have access to information that's either unique or proprietary or narrow enough to be functional in this particular use case? And then your questions are no longer, what is the AI piece? The question is like, what is the data? What is the use case? What are the insights? How do I operationalize that? And then ultimately, how do I drive value to some, consuming base, which then leads to, monetization strategies and whatever. But I think people need to flow all the way through. And then the second thing I think people really get wrong is like AI is seen as this big technology wave. And so people are focused on, what do I build? That makes a lot of sense to me. Like you do have to build stuff, but it's going to be built by people. And you got to think through, like, what are the workforce implications? Like, do you have access to skilled labor, especially given the arms race around AI talent? Are you going to compete with OpenAI and Meta for people who understand, like for data scientists and people who understand modeling? And if so, how are you going to do that? Right? Like, I think people got to think through, how do you carry your workforce along? Is it a hiring exercise? Is it a retraining exercise? Like, you got to have really deliberate people strategies, and then be aware if the subtext of AI, like the industry's kind of underlying narrative, if this is all about like job removal, and I don't actually think that AI is about job removal, but a lot of people talk about it that way. If you talk about AI as job removal and then you tell your teams go implement it, aren't they going to be thinking that they're implementing the end? I mean, like, you got to think through the people management side. It's not just like deliver a direction. I mean, how do you manage expectations? How do you show loyalty? How do you retool and reskill so that they can partake in the success of the company? Like, these people things. I don't think people pay enough attention to it. And then ultimately, like, if you're reliant on a team of highly skilled individuals to implement a thing that they don't think is in their best interest, like, then don't be surprised when it doesn't work the way you want it to work. So like those two things, so strategy and people, like if I could guide anyone around this whole AI movement, like pay attention to strategy, pay attention to people, and do more than just give lip service to the topics.
And as you said, Mike, about 42% of AI projects fail, and also you said about the GPUs can be a huge investment, and usually implementation of tech or transformations is a huge investment that the enterprises have to go through, right? But if this project's going to fail, so how do you consider leaders draw a line between taking the boldest steps without restricting innovation into their business processes?
I think, culturally, there's a whole idea that you want to fail and fail fast. I always struggle with that one a little bit. I feel like, when you celebrate failure, I think failure should be a thing that we're introspective about. But I think that the actual thing you want to do is not celebrate failure. It's like what you want to do is acknowledge failure without judgment. Like if you can remove judgment, so the thing that cripples individuals and then ultimately will leave scar tissue inside organizations is shame. Like if you're ashamed, if you're afraid, like if you feel like deep, guilt because somebody has blamed you, then what that does is it forces you to retreat. It's not the failure that's difficult, it's the judgment. And so what you want to do is really create separation between diagnosis, like did that succeed or fail, and then judgment. And if you can do that, then I think you can encourage experimentation. You can encourage iteration. You can allow investment to allow projects to start. And then if they fail, you don't end up creating this crippling moment where people are unable to move forward. Now, the interesting part of that is there's like a counter to that as well. Judgment is not just about things that fail. Sometimes we heap judgment on people when things succeed. Something works, and we go and we tell the team or the individual that you are amazing, you are infallible, and we give them this unusual confidence, and we actually don't always acknowledge that they happen to be in the right place at the right time. And if you give somebody unusual confidence, sort of this belief that you can do no wrong, that's just as dangerous as shame, because what it does is it allows people to go forward without necessarily doing the due diligence. So I think whether it's positive or negative, whether it's failure or success, I think what you got to do is remove judgment from the equation. And then once you do that, then that allows you to be hard on the issues, but soft on the people. And then you use your normal, financial constraints, governance models to make sure that money can flow with appropriate KPIs and inspection to make sure that you're delivering real results.
And when we consider about AI's impact on data center, right? What I believe is it often gets oversimplified as being about GPUs, right? But I believe that you see a deeper intersection of all of these, right? So my next question to you, Mike, would be: what does AI mean for data centers beyond just GPUs, and where does the real intersection lie in this equation?
So I work in the networking space, and so allow me for at least a couple of minutes to ignore compute and storage. There's two parts of AI. What our industry will frequently say is they'll say there's networks for AI, right? What are the routers and switches that are required to connect these GPUs together, and there's investment that goes into that. That's important. How do you build the right pipes so that all these things can communicate? And then there's AI for networking, which is really around AI ops. How do we provide better operational outcomes using AI? And in this space, I think AI will be difference making in the networking space, for operations. Simple examples. So if you're building out these large clusters, things like economics matter at high enough scale. Right. And so one of the one thing that drives economics more than anything else is competition. So if I can have multiple vendors competing for the same space, that will drive better per unit pricing because they have to compete against each other. Now, the thing that fights that multi-vendor side is going to be operations. If I have to build up a whole operations practice for each supplier in my network, then that weighs against the advantages, right? Because I carry the cost or the ongoing burden of managing multiple things. And so the question is, can AI help there? Things like RAG, things like natural language. If I put a natural language front end, then I don't have to necessarily interact with each individual device. I can put natural language over the top and use that as a translation layer that allows me to have a uniform operations approach when there's underlying diversity of equipment, suppliers, command lines, and so on. And so that's like a big deal. That unlocks a lot of the economics that previously was actually fairly unattainable for especially large enterprises. Beyond that, I can imagine that so network engineering. So I'm an old guy. Like you're younger than I am. So network engineering is an aging discipline, right?
Mm-hmm.
And as we age, as network engineers age and exit the workforce, is the bumper crop of would-be network engineers going to come out of university with networking degrees and 4 and 5 letter certifications from vendors? Or are they more likely to be, practiced in cloud? They've got familiarity with Azure and AWS. You see, what's going to happen in networking and around AI is actually not even just around AI, networking generally, is that when people come in, they're not going to be well versed, it's certified network professionals anymore. Now they're going to know the basics; they'll know the fundamentals. I think that's still a prerequisite. But if you can use AI to provide a different interface, a different way of interacting with the network, a different way for deploying, provisioning, remediating, solving some of the issues that happen in these networks, then AI becomes a tool to kind of move the workforce forward, acknowledging that there's going to be a dwindling supply of people who are capable of doing this type of work. So to me, it's a bridging technology. It is the future, but to me, it also creates a bit of a bridge and allows companies that are fighting today in an arms race for talent. It allows them to potentially activate talent at a lower cost, which allows them to exist alongside some of these cloud titans that would otherwise drain their local areas of all talent. Mm-hmm. And then beyond that, the AI can obviously do a lot around data. So if we're looking at remediation for large networks, there's all kinds of work you can do around dynamic thresholding to identify issues, issue resolution, pattern matching, so you can surface issues before they arise. I think a lot of that will come to play. And so if you put all of those together, I think networks in the future look a lot different with AI behind them. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, those networks will sit behind AI as well.
So, Mike, for now, till now we have covered transformation and technology, right? But leading this change isn't just about systems, right? It's about aligning people and aligning business goals and decision making as well, right? So let's explore the leadership side of the entire spectrum, right? Because without a great leadership, you can have great proof of concepts, but will not be able to execute them, right? So what advice would you give to the leaders that are struggling to align strategy with execution in complex organizations?
So the AI thing is, I think, a good example, because this is one of those things where there's healthy tension between the people who are making decisions and the people who are implementing decisions. Mm-hmm. I use a little bit of a funny model here. The people making decisions, I call them perpetrators. Mm-hmm. They're the ones that are responsible for the decision. If you remember cloud, there was a set of people, the board would come in and say, what is our cloud strategy? Mm-hmm. And so then they would hand that decision down to their teams. They say, we need to do something in cloud. Mm-hmm. And then the teams they hand it to, they're kind of the victims. They don't get to make the decision. They're just told, we're going to cloud, right?
Exactly.
Or what's our AI strategy? Mm-hmm. And then we're going to implement AI. Mm-hmm. Now, the perpetrators, right, the ones making the decision, for them, it's all about, what's the art of the possible? How do I feed the ambition? For the victims, the ones that have to implement, what they see is the obstacles. Here's all the problems. Here's all the things that are wrong. Now, when you're navigating change, you got to be aware who are you talking to, and you got to craft or tune your language to that audience. So if you're on the perpetrator side, it's all about how do I build out a go forward model. If you're on the implementation side, it's how do I give people permission to overcome obstacles, to surface the issues that they see. From a leadership perspective, those are two different conversations. Mm-hmm. And if you mix and match, I think what you do is you alienate the teams. If you go to the teams responsible for implementing and you dismiss their technical concerns, which are really steeped in valid technical assessments, then what you do is you alienate that team. It's very disempowering because they feel like they're not being heard. And then that's when you see issues around morale and in some cases attrition. Mm-hmm. So I think, clever leaders need to just identify and be very upfront. Look, we've got different populations that have different points of view. And then when you deal with them, make sure you give people, roughly, what they need in order to kind of get there. And then this kind of gets to the other piece. Like for me, and this is how I coach my teams. I bring in really smart technical people, and I tell them, like, look, if you think you're a thought leader, by definition, everyone disagrees with you. Because if everyone agreed with you, you wouldn't be a thought leader. You'd be a consensus thinker, which means that if you're a leader in one of these positions, right, and you're trying to drive change for your company, acknowledge that if you think something, if you're like ahead of the curve, then the job is not just to know the right answer. You also have to get everyone else to know the right answer too. And so skills around how do you explain, how do you sell, how do you overcome, how do you convince, those kind of sales skills, which we usually reserve for the outside world, they're very relevant inside. And I find, especially in technical domains, people put a huge premium on the technical expertise, but then they relegate some of these leadership skills to kind of soft skills, right? I would say, like, look, be aware you've got different audiences, and the skills required to sell to those audiences, they're not soft. Those are hard skills. You learn those in the same way you might learn to play a guitar, or you might learn a new language, or you might learn to hit a baseball. It's like practice and repetition and training. And if leaders can do that, if they can identify their audiences, and they put deliberate effort behind developing their skills, then I think you have like a really good chance of success.
And you often speak about cognitive biases, right? So how do leaders recognize and counter their own biases?
So the whole idea of cognitive bias, for those who don't know, like our brains have evolved to think certain ways. The one that almost everyone knows is confirmation bias, that if we hold a belief in the world, we tend to see things that support that belief. It's not the only bias. There's all kinds of cognitive biases. And I think your listeners should go and just do a simple search on cognitive bias. Like, it's very eye-opening. Now, the key to overcoming cognitive bias is you got to be unusually self-aware. I'll be honest, I have a lot of flaws as a leader, right? I could spend 45 minutes just talking about the top of those flaws. But when I'm at my very best, then I tend to be more curious and more introspective. I'll do a better job of listening. I'll ask questions. I won't just presume that my success is because I'm somehow, really capable. I'll look at the conditions that created it. I think anything you can do to be really self-aware, really introspective, and then ask people questions, not just when you fail, but when things go well. Ask questions to find out, what were the contributing factors. These kinds of things will help you tease apart those things that were environmental, right? What were the things that made it possible from just a circumstance perspective? And then what role did you play from a behavioral or from a decision-making perspective? When you can do that, when you're really curious, and I love Ted Lasso. Ted Lasso says you should be curious. When you're really curious, when you ask those kinds of questions, I think you'll get a lot more valuable feedback and insight. And then the people who can really take that in, and they don't have a hard shell, they're allowed to just kind of absorb that. Again, there's no judgment. It just kind of allow things to just be. When you do that, you create conditions that are ripe for change. When I'm able, and I'm not always able, but when I'm able to do that, I'm telling you, I improve as a person, not even as a leader, just as a person, I become better. And then probably not surprisingly, the teams around me become tighter and more effective. I think that's a big thing. So I think, look up cognitive bias, and then really, listen to Ted Lasso when he tells you that you got to be curious.
Definitely. Now, Michael, we have covered, we've gone in depth about leadership, strategy, and transformation, right? And I think our audience has enough for something to reflect on. Right? But before we wrap up today, I would like to shift some gears and let our audience get to know the personal side of Michael. With a quick rapid fire round. Whenever you're ready, I'll shoot the questions at you.
I'm ready.
Perfect. A book that has influenced you the most.
You got to read the book Switch by Dan and Chip Heath. Absolutely just a stellar book.
One cognitive bias you catch yourself falling for.
For me, it's survivorship bias. I tend to think that I'm wholly responsible for my success. That is objectively not true, but that's the one that I fall for because it makes me feel good about myself. So if I could purge one, that would be the one.
Most underrated skill in tech leadership in today.
I think generally speaking, if you can bring effort all the time. So I consistency, like the thing I struggle with is when I'm in one situation, like if I'm on a big stage, then I know I got to execute. When I'm on a small stage, sometimes I'll just be lazy and I'll fall back to muscle memory. Consistency, like if you can do it the same way every time without fail, that separates you as a leader.
Are you an early bird or a night owl?
I am an early bird. I tend to wake up at like 5:30 in the morning.
And if you're not in tech, which career would you have chosen?
I want to be a teacher. There's a movie called Mr. Holland's Opus. That's like my dream.
And how does a perfect weekend look like to you?
For me, so my kids are 14 and they play soccer. I just getting outside and playing soccer with the boys. There's nothing better than family bonding.
Definitely. And mountains or beaches, what's your favorite getaway?
Oh, the beach is 6 blocks that way. I got to go with the beach.
That's really nice. Favorite movie or series you can rewatch anytime?
Oh my gosh. Movie. Right now, I think I'm really into, there's a show called For All Mankind. That's a great show. If you're not watching it, you got to watch it.
Definitely. Are you a dog person or a cat person? Or neither?
We have 3 dogs. I've got 2 at my feet right now.
For sure. If you don't mind me asking, what are their names?
One of them is named Captain McBurgerbottom. We call him Cappy. The other one is called Wagyu Burger. We call him Waggy. And then the third one is called Beyond Burger. So we name all of our dogs after hamburgers.
That's really nice to know. And that brings me to the end of the conversation, Michael. It was great talking to you, and thank you so much for your candid perspectives on technology, transformations, and leadership, right? But before we wrap up, any parting words you would have for our audiences?
Look, I think people need to take their leadership craft seriously. I think it's all about people. One of the things, if I could give you one piece of advice, leadership is not about the tasks. It's not about the deliverables and the projects. It's about the people. And if you can connect with people and understand what motivates them, how to drive them, and how to create, a bit of autonomy so they can operate on their own, you'll get better leadership outcomes. And so if you do nothing else, I would say, move away from transactional leadership and really embrace servant leadership.
Thank you so much for your time, Mike, today. Our audience is enough to reflect on.
Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed this episode, subscribe on YouTube, Instagram, or your favorite podcast app. Catch past episodes and more at techdogs.com. See you next time.